Welcome everyone to today's webinar entitled New Data Released by the Canadian Partnership for Tomorrow Project, Physical Measures, Mental Health, Medication Use, Genotype Data, and Information on Biological Samples. I'm Bill Callery, and I'll be moderating the webinar. I'm a consultant with the Chronic Disease Prevention Alliance of Canada, or CDPAC. CDPAC is an alliance of Canada's major national health organizations who share a common vision for an integrated system of research, surveillance, policies, and programs for the promotion of healthy living and the prevention of chronic diseases. If you'd like to learn more about CDPAC, you can visit our social media links at the bottom, including Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. Today's webinar is a collaboration with the Canadian Partnership Against Cancer and Maelstrom Research, and will provide an opportunity to learn about these new data and how they may be used to support the work you're doing related to cancer and chronic disease. So we have three presenters today: Dr. Isabel Fortier, Chair of CPTP's Harmonization Standing Committee and Principal Investigator of Maelstrom Research; Erika Kleiderman from CPTV's Access Office; and CPTP's National Data Curator, Nataliya Dragieva. So now, without further ado, I'll pass it over to you, Dr. Fortier.
Thanks. So what we propose in the webinar is to start with a general introduction of what CPTP is about, and we will pass in more detail through the harmonization process that was applied to enable the construction of the core data set. And followed by that, we'll see in more detail each specific data set that is now available for use, and where and how to find information on our portal to be able to identify information of interest for the user, as well as ask for information and apply for access to these data, followed by a period of discussion and questions. So CPTP is the largest population-based cohort in Canada. It's built upon five province-specific cohorts, one in BC with over 28,000 participants, one in Alberta with almost 40,000 participants, a large one in Ontario, another one in Quebec, and the last one in Atlantic. Altogether, those cohorts are building the total of over 300,000 participants to form the CPTP cohort. A series of information were collected through time across each of these provinces. A risk and health factor questionnaire that was collected for the entire cohort, some physical measures and mental health measures that were collected for a subset of the population, as well as biological samples for a subset of the population. And now we are collecting the follow-up questionnaire for the entire population currently. These information will eventually be linked to administrative health databases and environmental exposure. We are already working on the linkage of environmental exposure with the data we have, working in collaboration with CANI, and exploring optimal ways to facilitate linkage with administrative health databases. It's not yet implemented, but it's coming hopefully soon. What is important to understand is that the core data set of CPTP is an ensemble of harmonized data. So locally, each cohort agreed to collect a core set of information, but the way the information was collected was sometimes limited by specific technical or local challenges that had to be faced. So it's not exactly the same data set that was collected by each of the cohorts. So it's important to understand that it's not all of the variables that can be co-analyzed across each of the cohorts. And we will see more in detail how the harmonization process was achieved. So for the harmonization process, I will not pass a lot of time to discuss the harmonization, but you can refer to a guideline that was published in 2016, and we followed that guideline through all of the process. The way it happened is that the study the data and clean the data sets and document their local data set. And after that, they transfer centrally the information to our team. And there we made a first quality control process in collaboration, obviously, with the court to be able to understand the discrepancies or the outliers that were identified. And after that, we did the harmonization process. And the way the harmonization was done is that we identified with the PI the list of core variables to be generated. So, for example, the height measured in centimeters. So after that, for each of the cohorts, we estimated if it was possible or not to create the height and transform. If, for example, the height was measured in inches, we had to transform the height under the centimeter format. So we applied the algorithm to be able to generate similar information across each of the cohorts to generate that core data set that we are now talking about. Following the processing under the same format, we had another evaluation of the quality of the harmonized data set that was done in collaboration with the cohorts. And the next step was to provide online the list of variables available for the user to be able to learn more about what is available and understand how the variables were generated, and we will come back to that in a couple of minutes. And finally, with the cohort, obviously, again, we are maintaining the database and preserve and are there to answer the questions of the different users. And I just want to emphasize the fact that it's a lot of work, the number of variables generated. It's a tremendous amount of work, but it's mostly a collaborative work, really. A lot of people were involved from the team here, from each of the cohorts. So I think it's really important to recognize the work of all of these people. So let's start with the available data and biosample now. So here you have all the data available, the list of all of the data available. The first one is that we have information generated from the health and risk factor questionnaire. Already you had online since a year or so, or even more, the core questionnaire, but the variables that are there were updated recently. And now we are adding the medication data set, so the medication intake, additional information on the familial history of diseases and diverse other conditions, some physical measures, the mental health measures, some interpretative variables that are of interest to understand the information from the biochemical measures. So, for example, if the person was pregnant or no, or the time since the last meal, or things like that. We already have now available the biosample per se, as well as information related to the pre-analytical information related to the biological sample collection and genotype data. What is coming is the follow-up questionnaire, but to be able to provide access to the follow-up questionnaire, we need to finish collecting the follow-up questionnaire, so it will come in 2018. As well as some biochemical measures and the environmental exposure that we hope to be able to link to the data, so the participant data in the coming year. And obviously, each 6 months, we will have updates of the core data set that is listed in the first column. If we find some minor errors or if additional participants are added, we will update each 6 months the data set that we are now providing. So let's start with the core questionnaire. In the initial core questionnaire, what we did, and like I mentioned, that was already available, but we added more information about the job history and added some participants, and so clean up some of the variables that are there. So it's now a better data set than it was 1 year ago. The total number of variables is 700 variables that were generated across or with 12 different study-specific data sets. Like I mentioned, each of the studies sometimes had different ways of collecting the information. So we have for that data set a total of over 300,000 participants. Really important to understand, and I mentioned it, but I think it's really important to take 1 minute to look at the following slide. You have access on the website to that interface where you can see on the left side you have the list of specific variables. So the 700 variables are there. And you have, when it's a green check, that means that that data set was able to be used to generate the variable per se. But as you see in in that circle, for one of the data sets, it was not possible to create the number of brothers and sisters, or the number of sisters, but it was possible to generate the number of siblings. So it's really important to understand that it's not the 700 variable that can be generated across each of the data sets. So you do not have 300,000 participants for each of the variables, but you have 300,000 participants to analyze the core information that probably that would be helpful for you. So you can have access to that table to really understand for each variable what data set can be used and the total number of participants. And you also have access for each of the variables to the distribution of the individual participant data across the different categories, or the mean and average when it's we are talking about continuous information, as well as the specific information about the variable, how it was created. And you also have the information about all the algorithm applied for each of the specific data sets to generate the core variable. So, for example, in my example of the transformation of the inches in centimeters, you will have exactly the algorithm that was applied to generate the variable. So everything is transparent. You can have all the information about all the transformation and all the decisions that were taken on the website. Still in the risk factor and health and risk factor questionnaire, you have there the distribution of the type of information collected. So you see that the health, their lifestyle and health behavior. Here you have 155 variables. For the familial history of cancer is 143. For the familial history of chronic diseases, you also have over 100 variables. Here you have the socio-demographic and economic characteristic where you have 100 variables. And you have a lot of information as well on the individual history of cancer, is the blue one, as well as the individual history of chronic diseases. Just briefly, an overview of the profile. So you have 62% of women. If you take over 43% that of the participants are age over 45 years old, and the majority were Canadian. And for the different diseases, the most frequent were arthritis and high blood pressure or other condition as well. and you have 10% of prevalence of cancer. So that was for the old data set. Now we are talking about the new data release. So the first data set that we will address is the medication. So it's at the time of recruitment, the medication, the list of prescribed medication collected at baseline. And there you have almost 300 core variable, because we have several repetition of the medication. So every medication was recorded, and that was collected for the entire population, so the 300,000 participants. Just to mention the type of information that is there, you have the medication name, the DIN number, the ATC code, as well as the main anatomical group. So it's the first level of the ATC code. And you can as well have access from Health Canada to additional information. And just to mention that 44% of the participants reported taking at least one prescribed medication. And here you have the distribution of the medication according to the different systems. So the most frequent is for cardiovascular system, some for nervous system as well. That was quite high. So the other set of data that is now available is the additional information about the family history and diseases that were not part of the core data set. So here, it's that information was collected only for subsample of the CPTP population, but you have over 500 variables there that were collected. And here you have the list of the variable, the number of variables for the different ICD codes. So for example, in the digestive system, you have over 40 variables. About the individual history as well as about the history of the diseases in the family of the participants. So I think that can be interesting. And the data in relation to these information will be available online, not the data, sorry, the metadata will be available online next week. It's not yet on the website, but it's coming. The physical measures data set, that data set includes the anthropometric measure, the sitting, standing height, the weight, height, and weight and hip circumferences, as well as the body mass index and body composition, blood pressure, resting heart rate, grip strength, and you have body bone density as well. It's not there, but it's not written, but it's there. And that is what collected. You have 65 variables in that data set and collected for over 100,000 participants. Mental health measures. In fact, we are talking about two scales, the Generalized Anxiety Disorder Assessment Scale, as well as the PHQ, so the Patient Health Questionnaire, that were collected for a subsample of 53,000 participants. And you have the score that are already also available. The interpretative variables. There you have information that could be of interest to interpret or the physical measures. If the person is pregnant and the number of weeks of pregnancy is important if you are talking about the weight, for example, as well as for the biochemical measures. So the alcohol consumption, tobacco, etc. in the 24 hours before the donation of blood. And you have currently only 13 variables, but it's the core one. But we will update and improve that data set through time with additional information. But the 13 main ones are there. I'm trying to go a little bit faster because time is passing. Biological samples now. just to mention there, you have a lot of biological samples that are available. Venous blood from over 130,000 participants, so 52% of the sample. Dry blood spot as well for 10,000 participants. You have some urine sample, origin saliva, and other type of saliva sample, for a total of 363 samples. So just not be mixed up. That's not the total number of participants, that's the total number of samples, because one participant can have provided blood as well as urine sample, for example. You also have information for all participants having donated biosample. You have information on the pre-analytical data. And it's a lot of variables there, again, that are available for the, in fact, 135,000 participants that provided blood. And those include information based on the ISBER-SPREC code, that version 2.0. So you have information with in relation to the storage, the centrifugation delay, etc. that are available in that data set. Finally, you have information we have genotype data that are available. That the genotype were generated within a project called Genotype Data Project. For a sub-cohort of approximately 5,000 of the CPTP participants. These participants have been selected if they had no history of cancer at enrollment. As well, they needed to have the health and risk factor questionnaire that was completed, the physical measure collected as well from assessment center, and obviously blood sample collected. And the genotyping was completing using the Afrometric UK Biobank Axiom 2.0 gene chip, and containing over 800,000 SNPs. So the genotypes are available, and the information about the project and all the details will be posted online really soon. But if you have questions, do not hesitate, and Erika will tell you more about how to obtain information later, but do not hesitate to contact us. So I passed really rapidly across all of the new data sets available, but I think it's important as well to take some few minutes to explain how you can find more information on the website about these variables that are available. So first thing, when you enter on the CPTP portal, that's what you see. So when you click on the, you can click on the Cohort Design, and it will lead you to a page where you can select the specific cohort. And for each of the cohorts, you will have details about the selection criteria of the participant, when the data were collected, the type of information that was collected at each data collection event, and the age range, etc. So you will have a comprehensive description for each of the cohorts of the cohort and design, as well as the collection of the information for that given cohort. The other thing that you have, if you click on the data set, you will see appearing that information. There are two ways that you can use to go to the specific variable collected. You can directly search by variable, or you can search by the data set. So we already mentioned the health and risk factor data set, the physical measure, mental health data, medication data, and the interpretative variable will appear in a week. Same for the familial history that will appear in a week. But if you click on one of the data sets, it will lead you to the list of variables that were collected, are available for that data set, as well as the description of the data set. And like I mentioned earlier, you have the green check when it's possible to have information, when it was possible to create the variable. So here, the systolic blood pressure, you have it across all of the data set, while the third measure of the systolic blood pressure was not available for all of the data sets, but you have the first and the second measure for all. And if you click on the variable, you will have the aggregated data. So you will have the max and minimum, as well as the mean for when it's a continuous variable. And when it's a categorical variable, you will have the distribution of the participant across each of the categories. And for that example, it's not really relevant because systolic blood pressure is systolic blood pressure. You don't have necessarily an algorithm to transform the information, but you can have access for each of the data sets to the specific information, the specific aggregated data for each of the data sets. And if information, like again, I'm taking the example of the height and the transform, you would have the algorithm available for each of the data sets as well. So the other way to search is to, like I mentioned at the start, to click on search variable that is available almost in all of the pages. And it will lead you to the complete list of all of the variables across all of the data sets. So you can select here a domain of interest. For example, you could select socio-demographic and economic characteristic, and that line would pop up, and you will, after that, under that, select the income, for example, and it would appear just the variable related to the income. Or you can select one of the data set here, and that's why in the presentation we put the acronym, because you can recognize the acronym in using the slides, and select just the core questionnaire, the core health and risk factor questionnaire, for example, and do your search that way. And it will lead you to the same information I just mentioned, so the variable with the aggregated data as well as with the link with each of the study-specific data sets. Biological sample, you also have a lot of information already available on the biological sample, as well as the interpretative variable related to the questionnaire, so you can have access to that information. But in the case of the biological sample, you do not have all of the list of variables collected. It's more a description of the biological sample collected. And it's the same thing for the genotype. You will not have all the genotype available online, but you will have all the information you need to be able to understand how the genotype were generated. And finally, the access process, and there I will let the lead to Erika to tell you more about the access process.
Okay, so I don't know if I have control of the slides. If not, Isabel, can I just ask you to do next slide?
Yes, sure.
Thank you. Okay, so we can go. Perfect. So I'll also try to make it rather short and sweet so that we have enough time for questions at the end. So this is just an overview of what I'll cover. So basically it'll be an overview of the national access infrastructure, kind of give you an idea of how the process works. So for the queries or feasibility stream, and then the actual application process. And then finally, I'll show you some screen captures of how to actually submit an access request. Next slide, please. So the National Access Infrastructure is currently composed of the Access Office, which acts as a single point of contact for access requests and queries. The Access Office aims to facilitate access while respecting the participants' consent forms, and then it also implements approved access policies and procedures. So it's considered sort of a hub that kind of centralizes and coordinates. And then we have the Independent Access Committee, that is the review and decisional body that determines whether an application is accepted or rejected for access to CPTP data. And they're accountable for the request approvals and oversight of access activities. Next slide, please. And so here we just have a graphic depiction. So within the Access Office, we have the Access Officer, we have a National Access Coordinator, a National Data Curator, and a National Biosample Coordinator for any biosample requests. And so they act like a one-stop shop that sort of triages queries and sends it or directs it to the people that are best placed to actually answer them. Next slide, please. So if we look, so there are two main types of interactions between the Access Office and the researcher or applicant. And so one is through queries, and the other one is the actual access process. So if we start first by looking at the process for queries, the researcher will contact the Access Office by email. And queries can be general in nature. They can pertain to feasibility or availability of data. They can be for support for the submission of an application, and also regarding letters of support, which we'll cover towards the end of my presentation. Next slide, please. So first, if we look at managing general queries, so researchers and applicants, they don't need to register in the portal to send a query. What they do is they send it by email to access@partnershipfortomorrow.ca. As we saw before, researchers can also view the CPTP data and biosample catalog directly through the portal. And and once the query is submitted to the Access Office, the Access Officer will triage it and send it to the appropriate person. And usually turnaround time is about 1 to 2 business days. Next slide, please. So now, researchers, when it comes to actually submitting an access application, researchers are encouraged to contact the Access Office and register through the portal for the preparation of their submission, and this sort of acts as a concierge service and will help to support the quality of submission, so to ensure that they're as complete as possible and to streamline the actual access process. And again, here we see the Access Officer acting as the individual who will triage and send queries to those best placed. And turnaround time really depends on the applicant and the questions that need to be addressed. Obviously, if it's something that has to do with feasibility or requires a bit more digging or contacting individual cohorts, it will take longer than a simple question. Next slide, please. And so now if we move on, so we looked at queries, and now the other interaction is really the application process. So what happens here is once the researcher has created an account and registered on the portal, they will fill out the application form online, attach all documents, and submit this all electronically. The Access Office will receive it, and so the whole access process is kind of a three-phase process. So phase one is really the assessment of administrative completeness of the application. So this is where the Access Office will check that the application is complete, all documents are attached, all necessary boxes are filled, and the Access Office will also flag any ethics-related issues here. So for example, if ethics board approval is missing. And once the application is deemed complete, it will then move on to phase two, which is the scientific feasibility assessment. And so this is at this phase, what we're really looking at is the alignment of the application with CPTP guiding principles, and then to check the actual availability of the requested data or biosamples. And this phase is really an iterative process with the researcher, whereby if any information is missing or we're unsure, the Access Office will contact the researcher to get input before moving it down the pipeline. And so once the application has been deemed complete and feasible, it will move on to phase three, which is the decisional phase, and it will be reviewed by the Independent Access Committee, which will determine whether the application will be approved, conditionally approved pending minor modifications, or rejected and invited to resubmit a revised version. And so all decisions are taken through consensus. And so again, here a letter will be prepared, drafted up, and the researcher will be informed. Once the application is approved and the researcher has been informed, then we will undertake the necessary steps to get the data and material access agreement fully executed and to start the process for data access. So next slide, please. So now we'll just quickly go through screen caps. So this is the portal view, and so to create an account, it would really be to click on the top right-hand corner, the button that says Register or Log In. Next slide, please. And then once that's done and an account has been created, to start an application form, the researcher or applicant will click on the little Access heading and then select My Access Requests, and this is the screen that they'll get. Next slide, please. And then to start a new access request, they will click on New Access Request button. Next slide, please. And then this is a screenshot of part of the application, and so all obligatory boxes are marked with an asterisk and need to be completed. And next slide. And so a complete CPTP application package will include the completed application form, the research protocol that has received ethics approval, proof of scientific peer review of the research protocol if this is available, the REB approval letter, and then a 2-page CV of the principal applicant. Next slide, please. And so now to conclude, I had mentioned that another service offered by the Access Office is really the drafting of letters of support and providing preliminary aggregate data to support grant applications. So the Access Office will review these requests based on general feasibility of the proposed project and, again, alignment with the guiding principles for CPTP. Any submissions or any requests for letters of support should be sent directly to access@partnershipfortomorrow.ca. And the documents that will be needed are really information about the grant that they would like to submit an application to, and then to have the scientific background of the submission. And extra information may be required if biosamples are needed. It's important to note that these requests will not undergo full feasibility assessment, and that at the time of request for a letter of support, REB approval is not needed. And the important take-home message here is that a letter of support does not guarantee access down the line. So if we can go to the next slide. And this is just a list of the different individuals within the Access Office, but that wraps up my little bit on the access procedures. So now I think we're turning it over to Luca.
Yeah, thanks. So I'm Luca Psturzi. I'm the program manager for the Canadian Partnership for Tomorrow project. I just want to give a little overview of the current leadership shown here. I won't go through everyone's names, but you can see there's a very diverse array of expertise in terms of contributing and building the cohort. So next slide, please. And our consortium of sponsors, where our national sponsor is the Canadian Partnership Against Cancer, and each of the regions have contributed at the provincial level some level of sponsorship shown on the right. In the interest of time, I won't go through each of them. Just want to get to the next slide, please. Okay, I just want to talk a little bit about the Canadian Cancer Research Conference, which is happening this November 5 to 7 in Vancouver, BC. This conference brings together the Canadian cancer research community spanning the research spectrum, from discovery research to policy research and clinical research to end-of-life care. It also provides a venue for networking and cross-fertilization between research disciplines. The 2017 conference will build on the success of previous meetings, which have been attended by about 1,000 delegates. There are 3 plenary sessions, a CCRA award session, and a public lecture. CCRA is Canadian Cancer Research Alliance, who puts on the conference. 25 concurrent sessions will be held over 5 time slots, and there was a record-breaking abstract submission this year, so it should be a really great conference. Overall, the objectives are to showcase the breadth and excellence of Canadian cancer research, to allow experts from across all areas of cancer research to engage in knowledge and share ideas to strengthen the cancer research community, support new investigators, and enhance patient involvement. And I just wanted to highlight, if anyone is attending, to two particular sessions at which CPTP will be featured. The first is on Sunday, November 5th, and it'll be a talk led by Dr. Darren Brenner, looking at the population attributable risk of cancer and the burden related to those lifestyle and environmental factors. And on Monday, November 6th, CPTP will have about a 90-minute session shown in the bottom segment of the screen, where we'll give an overview of the platform, a short overview, but really start to show some examples of research that have made use of CPTP's data and biosamples, and those are the titles there. Finally, the last talk will be the cross-cohort harmonization project for tomorrow, which will be led by our speaker today, Dr. Isabel Fortier, and she'll talk about this fantastic network of over 13 cohorts whose data can be potentially tapped into simultaneously to create a cohort of over 2.5 million participants in a study. So I'll leave it there. If we could just advance to the next slide. In terms of contact, CPTP website, and there's the address for the portal. In terms of access questions, please send requests to, like Erika mentioned, access@partnershipfortomorrow.ca. And we'll open up the floor now for questions over the chat, not over the teleconference line. So I believe we do have a few questions. Bill, do you want to moderate these?
Yes, thanks, Luca, and thanks to our presenters. That's been great. So we'll switch over to our questions and discussion. We've got about 10 minutes for that, and already got some really great questions that have come in through the questions and chat. So first question from Jason, did Dr. Fortier show the demographics of the 5,000 people who were genotyped using Affymetrix?
Sorry, I didn't hear. There was a problem with my can you repeat, Bill? I'm sorry.
Sure. The question from Jason is, did you show the demographics of the 5,000 people who were genotyped?
No, it was not in my presentation. It was the 300,000 participants, the ones I shown at the start. I could, that's something of interest, and that is, I think, something that will be included in the information about the genotyping project when it will be online, but it's not yet finalized, so it's coming. But if you have questions, specific question about subset of the data set, you, like Erika mentioned, you can easily contact us and we can provide you information. But that was not on my presentation. That's coming.
Great, thanks. Next question from Sane is, can the data from CPTP be linked to other administrative data within each province, for example, from to a hospitalization database?
Yes. Already some exercise of linkage have been started by the province to test and pilot the potential for linkage. But what is coming in the next year, hopefully, is to work as well on the harmonization of the administrative data across the provinces. For some data, the data are the same across the different data, provincial health administrative databases. But for some, you could have differences. So we will work with collaborators to try to harmonize or at least document the similarities on the variable of interest. But that will not be soon. It's something that will come later.
Thanks, Dr. Fortier. The next question from Mark Andrew and a few others I'm sure I'm wondering about this as well, but maybe just tell us if it's free to place a query and maybe overview of the access process.
Perhaps I will let Erika answer that one.
Sure. So when it comes to placing a query, whether it has to do with asking about the availability of a certain variable or a certain, or just about the access process, it is all free. So you just have to send the your query to the email that we had posted before, and we will take care of responding it as promptly as we can.
Great. Next question from Mark Andrew. Again, is it possible to use the data for public health surveillance purposes rather than research?
I think that as long as it's, it's passing through the normal process for access, yes, sure. Any project of relevance will be accepted. The problem is that I'm not sure, but I'm sure the population is not necessarily representative of the Canadian population because of the bias in the selection. So we need, I think, for sure, CPTP can be used for to answer public health-related information, but it's not representative of the Canadian population.
Thanks. Question from Nadine. Can the data be linked to geographic location within provinces? For example, census tracts as part of the Canadian census geography?
Yes, we are working with CANU. I don't know if you know CANU, and I think it's another webinar that was happening 1 hour before this one. That is particularly interesting as a project, and we are working with the PIs of CANU to facilitate the linkage of the information we have, because we have the postal code of the participant. It's not actually, we cannot provide that information to users, but each of the cohorts have that information, so we will link the exposure data, different social as well as physical exposure data, to the data we have, and provide that. Hopefully in 2018 will be the first release for the linked data, including exposures. And we will follow the release of CANU. So each time CANU has a new release, we will link the CANU data to the CPTP ones.
Thanks. Next question from Joanne. Can you comment on the costs of data access and usage by researchers?
Erika, again, I'll let you answer.
So I will not go into specifics, but we are currently finalizing and preparing a document that we will hopefully be able to either put online or make available shortly. But so yes, so please stay tuned, and we can provide further information at a later date.
And we're at about a minute left, so we'll wind down. I don't see any more questions, but if anyone's got any burning questions, they can put them in now, or feel free to send it to any one of our emails, and we'll get that answered for you. But I just wanted to, again, thank everyone for joining. Apologies for some of the hiccups right at the beginning in terms of technology, but really appreciate you joining us today, Dr. Fortier, Erika, Kleiderman, and Nataliya. I know you're on the line as well, and Luca as well, and sharing this new data, some of the searchability functions, the application and approval process. And thanks, Luca, as well, for highlighting the CPTP partners and funders and the upcoming conference in November. That's wonderful to hear about. So thanks very much, everyone, and hope you have a great rest of your afternoon.